When we talk about dismissive avoidance, we're not just talking about people who fear love. We're talking about individuals who were never taught that love is safe. You see, from a young age, they learn that connection comes with risk, that vulnerability invites pain, and that needing someone always ends with disappointment. So they made a quiet promise to themselves of never depend on anyone. They built a life based on that vow. Independence became their identity. Emotional distance became their comfort zone. And when someone comes along, someone patient, consistent, emotionally available, that very person becomes the trigger for everything they've tried to outrun. It's a paradox that feels cruelly ironic. The one person who shows them genuine care, who loves them without conditions, who simply wants to be there, that person becomes the source of discomfort, anxiety, even resentment, because love to the dismissive avoidant is not interpreted as safety. It's interpreted as exposure. The moment they're loved deeply, they begin to feel seen in a way they don't know how to handle. And to be seen means to be known. To be known means to risk rejection. That's the psychological paradox. Love doesn't feel like healing, it feels like danger. When you've spent a lifetime avoiding emotional closeness, genuine affection feels like losing control. The dismissive avoidant lives in a state of internal contradiction. They long for connection just like anyone else, but they've built emotional walls so high that intimacy feels like a threat to survival. They may not consciously recognize this, but their nervous system does. Their body registers intimacy as chaos. And that's why they pull away right when the relationship is at its most meaningful. The very moment they should lean in, they retreat. It's not because they don't care. It's because caring deeply exposes the soft underbelly they've been protecting since childhood. Think of it this way. When you've been burned by neglect or emotional inconsistency early in life, you learn that closeness equals pain. So as an adult, you convince yourself that detachment equals peace. But when someone truly loves you, that illusion starts to collapse. Their love begins to melt the armor. And that's when panic sets in. Because if the armor comes off, so does the illusion of safety. The avoidance behavior often looks cold, dismissive, even cruel. But underneath, there's fear. The kind of fear that whispers, if I let you close, you'll see the parts of me that even I can't love. That fear is what drives them to sabotage, to withdraw, to devalue the person who loves them most. They'll pick at flaws, question motives, create distance, anything to convince themselves that the relationship isn't worth it. Because if they can convince themselves that the lover isn't safe or ideal, they can justify retreating without having to face the deeper truth, that they are the ones terrified of love. You might notice how they thrive in the early stages of attraction, when everything feels light and playful, when emotional stakes are low. But the moment things deepen, their internal alarm goes off. Emotional intimacy demands vulnerability. And vulnerability to a dismissive avoidant feels like surrender. They equate dependence with weakness. So when their partner offers love, care, or emotional depth, they interpret it as an attempt to control them. The very thing that's meant to connect becomes, in their mind, something to resist. This is where the paradox sharpens. They crave love, but they also despise it. They long for someone to understand them, but when that person appears, they shut down. They push away the only person who truly sees them because being seen feels unbearable. It confronts them with their own emotional deprivation, the realization that they have never allowed themselves to fully feel or be loved. That awareness is painful, and rather than face it, they redirect that discomfort outward. They begin to resent the lover for making them feel emotions they've long buried. Love becomes the enemy, and the lover becomes the threat. You can imagine how tragic this cycle becomes. The dismissive avoidant isn't trying to destroy the relationship, but they're trying to protect themselves. But the methods they use for protection, withdrawal, emotional coldness, avoidance, are the very things that destroy it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. See, I don't need anyone. They end up proving themselves right by driving away the one person who could have disproved that belief. What makes this even more painful is the silent contradiction that plays out inside them. On the surface, they seem indifferent. They might act as if losing that person doesn't bother them. But internally, there's a quiet ache, a sense of confusion that they can't articulate. They miss the person, but missing them feels shameful because it means admitting they cared. And caring feels dangerous. So they suppress it, bury it under distractions, work, independence. Anything to avoid feeling the truth that they pushed away the one who truly loved them. Philosophically, this dynamic reflects something universal about human nature, our resistance to being fully known. To be loved authentically requires allowing another person to see the parts of us we hide even from ourselves. That kind of exposure requires courage, self-awareness, and emotional maturity. For the dismissive avoidant, love becomes a mirror that reflects their unhealed wounds. And when they look into that mirror, they don't see beauty or safety. They see weakness. They see everything they've tried not to be. So they break the mirror. They destroy the connection, believing it's the other person's fault, when really, it's their own fear staring back at them. This is why so many people who've loved a dismissive avoidant walk away feeling confused and inadequate. They ask, why did they hate me when all I did was love them? But the truth is, your love wasn't the problem. It was the trigger. Your presence brought light to a place they'd kept dark for years. You touched emotions they'd learned to suppress. And in doing so, you became both their hope and their threat. They didn't hate you. They hated the feeling of being seen. They hated that your love forced them to confront their own inability to love freely. Yet there's something profoundly human in that struggle, because even in their avoidance, they're still searching for peace. They just haven't learned that peace isn't found in control, but in surrender. It's not in keeping people out, but in letting the right person in. And until they face that truth, they'll keep running from the very thing that could heal them. The sad irony is that the dismissive avoidant often realizes too late that the one who truly loved them wasn't their enemy, but their mirror. The person who showed them unconditional love wasn't trying to expose their weakness. They were trying to help them rediscover their strength. But when love feels like danger, every act of care looks like a trap, every gesture of affection feels like pressure. So they choose the illusion of freedom over the reality of connection, and in doing so, they lose both. And maybe that's the tragedy of it all. The way we sometimes mistake safety for confinement and love for threat. Because the truth is, no one can outrun love forever. You can suppress it, deny it, push it away. But eventually, you meet yourself in the silence that follows. And in that silence, you realize that the person you pushed away was never your problem, they were your opportunity. The opportunity to heal, to trust, to finally be known. But for the dismissive avoidant, that realization usually comes when the one who loved them is already gone. Control, it's the invisible currency of the dismissive avoidant. When you peel back the layers of detachment, emotional distance, and stoic self-sufficiency, what you find underneath isn't strength. It's control, a desperate need to manage every emotional variable, to avoid ever being in a position where they could be hurt, exposed, or dependent. That control is their armor, their way of saying, you can't hurt me if I never let you close enough. But here's the paradox. What they call control is often just fear in disguise. It's a coping mechanism built from years of emotional uncertainty, from experiences where love was inconsistent, conditional, or even punishing. Somewhere along the way, they learned that emotions equal chaos, that needing someone meant losing themselves. So, they crafted a worldview around the belief that detachment equals freedom, that shutting off emotions equals peace. It's the perfect illusion. The more they withdraw, the more they feel safe. The more they control, the less they feel pain. Yet the truth is, what they're really controlling is not their environment. It's their vulnerability. They keep their emotions locked away, convinced that self-sufficiency makes them unbreakable. But that same emotional control becomes the cage that keeps them disconnected from what they secretly crave most: intimacy. Real connection requires surrender. It requires trust, openness, unpredictability. And for the dismissive avoidant, surrender feels like death. So when someone truly loves them, someone patient, giving, and emotionally grounded, it threatens the very foundation of that illusion. Suddenly, control starts to slip. The structure they've built around their heart begins to crack. Love introduces uncertainty. It brings spontaneity, emotional risk, and vulnerability. It's not logical. It's not predictable. And that's exactly what terrifies them, because love, by its nature, cannot be controlled. The dismissive avoidance reaction to this is almost always the same: pullback. They start creating emotional distance to reassert control. They might withdraw physically, act cold, minimize affection, or distract themselves with work or independence. Anything to restore equilibrium, to feel on charge again. What they don't realize is that this instinctive retreat isn't protecting them. It's sabotaging the very connection that could bring them the safety they've been searching for. It's a self-perpetuating loop. The moment they feel loved, they feel exposed. The moment they feel exposed, they try to regain control. And to regain control, they push away the source of love. This cycle reinforces their core belief: love is dangerous. People always want too much. I'm better off alone. It's not a conscious choice. It's a conditioned reflex. They don't even see how their pursuit of control is actually an act of fear. Think about how exhausting that must be. Living your entire life trying to manage every emotional outcome. Calculating how close to let someone get. Measuring how much affection to give before it feels unsafe. It's not freedom. It's a kind of quiet imprisonment. The dismissive avoidant believes they're protecting their peace, but they're really just protecting their pain. And pain, when left unhealed, demands constant control. The tragedy is that this illusion of control creates the very emptiness they're trying to avoid. When you choose emotional detachment as a survival strategy, you might escape heartbreak, but you also escape connection. You avoid rejection, but you also avoid love. You stay in control, but you never truly live. There's no joy in predictability when it comes at the cost of intimacy. There's no peace in solitude when it's born from fear. You see, control is not the same as safety. Safety is born from trust. Trust in yourself, trust in others, trust that you can handle what comes your way. Control, on the other hand, is born from fear. Fear of losing, fear of being hurt, fear of needing. The dismissive avoidant doesn't trust themselves to survive emotional pain, so they preemptively avoid it. They say, "I don't care." Not because they don't feel, but because feeling would threaten the control they depend on. Philosophically, this speaks to a deeper human dilemma: our tendency to equate power with emotional restraint. We live in a culture that glorifies independence, that praises people for not needing anyone. But what's often celebrated as strength is in truth avoidance. The dismissive avoidant embodies this cultural lie to an extreme. They think control equals power, when in reality, it's a defense against powerlessness. True power isn't the ability to avoid pain. It's the courage to experience it without losing yourself. When someone who truly loves a dismissive avoidant tries to show them consistency, care, and vulnerability, the avoidant interprets that as intrusion. They see love as an attempt to breach their defenses, to make them dependent again. They might even feel anger, not because the lover did anything wrong, but because they feel their control slipping. Love exposes the limits of their emotional independence. And for someone whose identity is built on self-sufficiency, that's terrifying. So they retreat into detachment, the one thing they can still manage. They turn cold because warmth feels dangerous. They become distant because closeness feels suffocating. They may even convince themselves that the loving person is too emotional, too needy, or too intense. It's a narrative that allows them to reclaim control by defining the lover as the problem. That way, they can leave without guilt and reinforce the illusion that detachment keeps them safe. But here's the twist: deep down, they know something's missing. Even in their solitude, they feel the quiet ache of emptiness. It's subtle, a dull, persistent awareness that something vital is absent. That's the cost of control. You might keep your heart unbroken, but you also keep it unopened. And in doing so, you deny yourself the full human experience of love, loss, growth, and connection. The dismissive avoidant doesn't realize that the control they're clinging to is the very reason they feel so emotionally barren. Love requires uncertainty. It requires risk. Without it, relationships become transactions, measured, predictable, safe, but lifeless. The heart cannot thrive where everything is controlled. It needs space to feel, to trust, to let go. The deeper truth is that the need for control comes from an absence of trust, not just in others, but in themselves. They don't trust that they can survive vulnerability.